Here with a discussion about Total War and a discussion about Company of Heroes 3, which came out not too long ago, and features this campaign, this kind of sandbox dynamic campaign set in Italy, about the Italian campaign during World War II. You start over here in Salerno. Well, really, you start in Sicily, and then you invade over here, and then the campaign map opens up with a naval invasion of Salerno. And your objective is to breach the Winter Line, take Rome, win on the Italian front in World War II. Now, it's not really a sandbox on the same level of Total War, of course. Not that many factions. You're the Allies, you're fighting the Germans, that's it. Just two factions to deal with. But I do think there are certainly some things Total War could learn from this game that they could implement in some way, shape, or form. Because I think there's some really interesting ideas. Though overall, how do I feel about Company of Heroes 3? I think it's decent, but it doesn't hold a candle to something like Warhammer 3 or some other Total War games. And in particular, there's certainly some things that Creative Assembly shouldn't take from this game. The auto resolve is even worse, far worse than Total War games. So I had to fight a lot of battles manually, and I don't think I lost a single random battle. I may have lost some of the missions, and I had to do them multiple times, but that's because the missions are designed around your companies having a lot of power. I was able to win a lot of the skirmish matches, which is really weak companies. So when I came up a mission which was basically designed around the idea of having a high-level company, yeah, I kind of struggled. Anzio in particular was a nightmare over here. So the auto resolve, not great. And a lot of the battles are basically skirmish battles in an RTS. So you start with base, they start with base. There's some things that change, but a lot of things that don't. And it's not quite the same situation as in a Total War game. Though I will say about the battles, starting with that, one thing I did like about the battles here is that pretty much every battle I had the main objective was to take control of the map, wipe out the enemy. You could always win every match by destroying their base. But you could also win it through by doing objectives. But more crucially beyond that, you could do these side objectives, and what they were basically giving you was extra experience, or rather skill points, because that's what companies use. That's the experience of this game. They're skill points. And those skill points are used to increase the power of your companies, get abilities, army abilities, upgrades, and unlocking unit types. And I think that having this kind of level of customization for every army to begin with would be very interesting. And two, I find the idea of having dynamic objectives in battles, bonus objectives. You don't have to do them to win, but I find the idea a very interesting one. Because right now, the way I feel about a lot of Total War battles is they can be pretty stale and pretty forgettable. And so are the battles in this game. But the dynamic objectives can add a lot of interest. Like some of the objectives included, a plane crash, and supplies were lost, or we had a scout and we need to go recover the scout. Things like that, those kind of objectives. Or there's a column of enemy tanks that's heading towards the enemy base. Obviously, this is in the context of a World War II game, but I think those kind of dynamic objectives could make a lot of battles interesting, especially kind of the siege battles, because siege battles right now in Total War are pretty horrible, honestly, and that's because they don't really feel like you're not really doing street fighting, you're not really fighting in the settlement, the vast majority of the battle is on the wall. Well, what if it wasn't on the wall, right? Or what if you had stages to the siege battles where the first stage would be on the wall, breaching the walls, then the second stage, which would be a different battle, would be fighting in a settlement and taking the center. Just some ideas over there, not necessarily from Company of Heroes, but I think having more dynamic objectives would be very welcome. Even if they're just side objectives that give you extra experience, it will give people a reason to care more about fighting individual battles. Because right now, when I have to play a campaign for, let's say I'm doing a Let's Play and I'm playing it on Legendary very hard in Total War Warhammer 3, I'll be honest with you guys, the vast majority of the battles that I have to fight are boring as dirt. I actually have a lot more fun in Total War when I'm playing it on my own time by just setting the battle difficulty to easy and just playing a campaign like that. And believe it or not, 90% of the battles, 95% of the battles that I encountered there would be battles I'd win even on very hard. It's kind of that crappy system that we have right now. But that's just one aspect, dynamic objectives and battles. But there's some other things, a lot of other things. Now, I think that some of the options that you have on the campaign map are pretty interesting. So what you have is the naval aspect to begin with. So you have ships, and you can get more ships. Now, there's no naval combat in this game, and it's not really an auto-resolve system. What you can do with a ship, let's say I take this destroyer, right, this Mahan class destroyer, and I want to attack this German destroyer over here. If I just send it over here, then what it will do, it will just shoot at the enemy. I can't actually reach it because it's too far away, but you get the idea. It can shoot at it, do some damage, and eventually destroy it. There are also coastal batteries, which if they move in range, so for instance, this coastal battery did some damage on this particular destroyer. That's why it's not moving, by the way, because if it moved, it would take more damage from the coastal gun emplacement. And besides, I've taken all the ports on this side of the map, so they don't have anywhere to run to. That's an interesting aspect. And also, you can repair ships. You can salvage a ship, obviously for the resources. You can repair a ship if it's near a friendly port. And the way repair works is you're using the manpower resources. Manpower is used to buy units, to buy companies, to buy ships, to buy planes, basically all the armies that you're using, as well as a couple of other actions when it comes to settlement. So for instance, here I have a hospital. I can improve the first aid kit over here. One of the things I do like here about this system is the way you deal with basically casualty replenishment. It's not automatic. You have to spend resources to replenish your units. It's done. The replenishment is done instantly. So, for example, here, if I want to, let's say this company was damaged, if I want to repair it, what I do is just use the improve heal target or healing target to repair. If I have a mechanized company or an armored company in this case, and I want to repair them, then I need to repair. And that same goes for ships. So I think that's an interesting dynamic as opposed to the automatic replenishment. The problem with replenishment is it's either really good and thus you don't care, basically, or it's bad and then you care about it. But either way, because of the way the replenishment system works, especially in deep and enemy territory, if you don't have heroes, what it really pushes you to do as a player, and this is something that's happening in Total War Warhammer in particular a lot, is you're really pushed to play very conservatively, very defensively, to take the fewest number of casualties. What that also leads to is, as opposed to having many different interesting armies and army compositions, you're really pushed for the one that works the best, because that's how you win the campaign the most effective way. And having fun around with different kind of unit types is not recommended, because they're just going to be less effective. You just want to find the most effective playstyle for a particular faction, for a particular race, abuse the crap out of that. And then on top of that, you also have to adopt tactics, strategies, and battles where you're doing the maximum damage to the enemy and taking the least amount of damage. Now, that's fun, I understand, for certain people. Like, people like Legend of Total War, they do enjoy abusing the crap out of the AI, winning battles, they shouldn't win, all that. But I've never really enjoyed that, because I don't enjoy corner camping or hiding away my entire army, just luring one enemy unit at a time, or running or leading the enemy army on a wild goose chase around the entire map while a couple of units are moving into a position to get sniped. Like, I've seen a lot of Legend of Total War's videos, and they can be fun, but I hate those tactics. I think that's not how the game should be played to achieve the maximum potential. But that's the best way you can play it, because that's how you achieve the maximum potential. That's how you conquer a lot of territory very quickly. That's how you win the campaign very, very quickly, by doing crap like that, basically. Or by playing an overpowered faction like the Warriors of Chaos, where you can just auto-resolve every single battle of your campaign, or the vast majority of battles in your campaign. Or by having ridiculously high casualty replenishment. So I think tying replenishment to a resource that, by the way, you will have plenty of. Like, you're not going to really run out of manpower most of the time. There are resources that you can struggle with, but manpower is going to be, there's going to be a lot of it, partly because there's a population limit. So you have a population limit, so that means you can only have so many companies on the ground, so many ships at sea and so many planes in there. In theory, there are some ways, there are some traits through your advisors that give you some free ships. So basically the ships and planes, basically all of them, with the exception of like one cargo plane, the ships and planes that I picked up were basically through the traits that I had over here. So like General Buckram over here gives me a free bomber. In my campaign, General Norton gives me a free destroyer. So all these destroyers I either started with or I got for free. I didn't build any of them in this campaign. So it can be an issue with population. I think they should have split it between planes, ships, and companies. Because right now you have no reason whatsoever to build planes, no reason whatsoever to build anything but companies. Because companies are the ones that are going to conquer the territory on the campaign map, whereas planes and ships are support units, basically. So you want to focus on direct combat application of your companies. So few issues when it comes to that, but I think having a replenishment tied to a resource that you might have a little of it early on, but you get a lot of it later on, could be interesting. Though, of course, if you have very little of it, you're still going to play very defensively early on and use bullshit tactics. But I don't know. Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea to have. Not automatic replenishment, but replenishment you have to do. Because we used to actually have that in a way in Rome 1, Medieval 2, in the older, very old Total War games. And the thing about playing those games, because I've played quite a lot of Medieval 2 and Rome 1, I've been playing this series for almost 20 years. And you didn't really feel it back then that, oh, you could lose units. You accepted that you could lose units. It was fine. You could always recover. You didn't necessarily fight every battle with your army at full strength. It caused a lot of issues with the AI. I understand that aspect. But I think that just having a system where the AI can spend some resources every turn, and it happens instantly. They can recover very, very quickly. So it's not like the kind of system where, oh, they have to go back to a settlement, as opposed to the automatic replenishment that we have. And the cheats, by the way, this is the frustrating aspect, the cheats the AI uses. Because the AI is using cheats, basically, to have a ridiculous amount of casualty replenishment. And there's many times where, oh, you destroy my army, congrats, next turn I'm coming back with that army at full strength. This especially is annoying with the vampire count. So I think the current system of replenishment can be pretty broken. There are some other things as well. There are certain actions that can be interesting on the campaign map. So one of the things we do have here are emplacements. So for instance here, I have a howitzer emplacement. Now I can't actually use it here because of range issues, I believe. But but you do have various emplacements you can construct. So for instance, there's artillery emplacements, anti-tank emplacements, anti-air emplacement. So the Germans here had an artillery emplacement, an howitzer emplacement, an artillery emplacement. They had a bunch of machine gun nests that I've destroyed during the course of the campaign. But basically what those were doing is that they were placed in strategic locations. There were a lot of them. Very, very clearly. There were an enormous number of them over here. Like, this is just towards the very, very end of the campaign. There are an enormous number of them. What happened is, if you moved in front of them, they would do some damage. Like machine gun nests would do damage versus infantry companies, so like these special forces or these airborne troops. Anti-tank guns would do damage against armored companies, and coastal guns would do damage to ships. Anti-air guns would do damage to planes. And I think having those emplacements that aren't really controlled, they just shoot automatically, right? With the exception of artillery emplacements, which you can control and order them to fire at a certain location. For instance, let's say I were to do a bombardment here. And we also have the ability to bombard the target with bombers. Some other planes can intercept, like you can have interceptors. And I think that the ability of having, like, we have a machine gun nest here, and the machine gun nest, these emplacements are tied to the supply of a nearby settlement. So if you take the settlement, they will start losing HP. That's what's happening here. They're losing HP very slowly here because this is the highest difficulty, but they're tied to that settlement. Maybe they should be destroyed automatically when you take the settlement as opposed to just losing HP. or they maybe should lose HP faster. But I think the idea of like these kind of defensive emplacements could be very interesting, because right now the campaign map, besides the armies marching around in the settlements, can feel pretty sparse. So this can add something more interesting to the current campaign map. We used to have forts that we could construct in Total War. We used to have watchtowers we could construct for line of sight. We don't have those kind of things anymore. We just have settlements and armies and, of course, heroes. Now, you could say, oh, some of these actions are things heroes can already do, right? Well, yeah, but the way the game is currently played, you almost never want to do that. Agents have outstayed their welcome, I think, in the Total War series. They're either broken as hell or they're worthless. That's the extremes we've alternated between when it comes to Total War. I think very rarely we've had the situation where agents weren't either completely broken or completely useless. Right now, agents, or rather heroes in Total War Warhammer, are worthless on the campaign map because you always want them to have them in an army for their combat ability and the benefits they provide to that army. You never want to have them just roaming around the campaign map. And the agent war, like, it used to be different, of course, but as things currently stand, neither you or the AI have any reason to do so. And tying these abilities to companies or emplacements, or support units like planes, ships, all that. Actually having ships, dedicated warships on the campaign map that just auto-resolve naval battles could be a bit more interesting, as opposed to the way naval combat is being handled right now in Total War. Then we have some more interesting actions when it comes to the campaign. So a company can get certain detachments. One of them gives you a bombardment ability, like logistics. You can build supply caches. Speaking about supply caches, just to touch on that very quickly. Every emplacement, every company, every ship has supply. If they run out of supply, they start taking damage every single turn. Basically attrition. But the supply is something that they always have, and something they can run out of. Now, you can salvage some supply in enemy territory, but basically you need companies to be in your territory. That means you can't do shit like, oh, I'm just going to march my company through significant regions of enemy territory, take out their capital on the other side of the map. You can't do that because you'll run out of supply. So you actually need to set up logistic lines. You actually do have a sense of logistics. It's not the best system of logistics, but at least it exists. Like, the campaign here can be very simple, very straightforward, and it is. But I think just the concept of actually building supply lines, having to worry about, the only exception, of course, is that ports, because you can supply those via the sea. Unless, yeah, of course, you get to deal with naval attacks then. That's the downside of it. But outside of ports, if you're moving inland, you need a direct line between your settlements, because otherwise your units are potentially going to run out of supplies in your territory. And I believe you do need a direct link between your territories, or supplies will run out. Or if you don't you should need that kind of link between your territories. Because what happens right now in Total War, it's like, you could just conquer a faction, you could just move an army for a faction's territory, go to their capital, start conquering from there. And more often not, doing stupid shit like that actually works far better than you might assume. Another thing that's great here is an ability, a company ability, or an army ability that's tied to a detachment. Like, detachments just give you certain abilities for the companies. You can get artillery, you can get supply, or the abilities to build supply caches. But another thing you can do is encircle a target. And what encircling a target will do, I don't have any enemy company here in the field to show it on, but what encircling the company does is when you face them in battle, they can't run away. They can't retreat. And it will do some damage, but it costs resources. Repairing a company, healing a company costs resources. And then finally, there's marching. Now, this is kind of like a forced march stance, but not quite the same thing. Because forced march makes you very vulnerable. This does not. You can't attack a target with this stance, but what's important here is this marching stance, one, consumes fuel resources, which can be limited in the campaign. And on top of that, you can switch a company to a march stance after they've conquered the territory. So say, for instance, I move this company over here, I attack the settlement, I take it over, then I can just quickly switch into the march stance over here to move further west. It makes traversing the campaign a lot easier and a lot faster. And actually, this campaign is kind of poor at teaching a lot of its tips and tricks like that. Or the tutorials don't necessarily cover these kind of things. Like, oh, you want to use the march stance to actually cover a vast swath of territory very, very, very quickly. Because that's how you can cover a lot of ground. That's how you can do things quickly, but it's costing those precious field resources, which aren't so plentiful to begin with. Now, here I have plenty of them, sure, but this is like late stage, 35 turns in. I've built a massive empire effectively at this point. So you have to make those decisions. I think it's great to have the ability to just move, even if you can't capture another settlement. That's where it gets OP for certain factions in Total War, where, oh, you can just capture settlement after settlement after settlement. That will be overpowered. No, you can just move more after you've done the turn. So for instance, here I'm moving using the march stance, just bypassing. Next turn, I'll be at this settlement. Speaking about settlements, a lot of them may not have defenders. They don't have a garrison by default, but what they have are these shields, so to speak. And what these shields do is they prevent you from just outright conquering it with just one company. Like over here, I have eliminated one shield, I need to eliminate two. But there are ways around that. So I could bring in a bomber to do a bombardment of a location. I could use naval gunfire support. I could use artillery support on the ground from artillery company. Having those kind of armament abilities where you can just bombard the section of the campaign map. And it's not like, oh, you bombard the settlement like it was in Shogun to Fall of the Samurai. Rather, you can use this bombardment ability to just hit an area of the campaign map. And everything in that area, including your own units, will be targeted. So you can't just use it on a settlement that you've just approached. No, you have to use it beforehand, or otherwise you're going to hit your own units. I think that kind of flexibility with artillery on a campaign map can be very interesting. I think Steel Division 2, if I'm not mistaken, also has a similar ability, and there's no reason why something like this shouldn't be in Total War. And in fact, it has been in Total War. So artillery, like you could have like some long-range artillery units that you could use to bombard the enemy from, a few kilometers away or dozens of kilometers away, because artillery has had that range, depending on time period, of course. But naval gunfire, if we ever get back to the Napoleonic era or the Imperial Empire Total War area, that would just make a lot of sense to have again in the game. And those are just some of the things I think that Company of Heroes did well. Some of the mechanics I think they did well that would work very well in a Total War game. That's just my perspective on this. Obviously, adjusted for a Total War game. Wouldn't necessarily work in Warhammer 3, but could work very well in some future Total War titles. And I think Creative Assembly has a big problem on their hands. With Warhammer, they succeeded brilliantly financially. For all the issues Warhammer 3 has had, for all the problems that Realms Chaos, they did succeed with that game. The problem is going forward, because one of the things they really focused on heavily in Warhammer 3 was bringing all those races to the game, right? Having those unique mechanics. That's what they focused on, to the detriment of a lot of mechanics. It took years to get the proper diplomacy system, and still not really the best. I mean, Troy has a much better diplomatic system, I'd argue, and a better economic system. In a future Total War game, and this is the reason I feel Three Kingdoms failed, this is the reason that I feel Troy failed. It's not they were horrible games, they did a lot of things well, but there was not enough variety on the campaign map, and not enough variety between the different campaigns, because just even in Warhammer 1, like the baseline factions, Chaos plays differently than Dwarves, very differently than Dwarves, and Greenskins than the Empire. And we do need more dynamic campaigns, we do need more unique mechanics. If Creative Assembly just goes back to the idea of Total War campaigns are going to play similarly, that's going to lead them to future ruin, I feel. Some people will argue, obviously, that Three Kingdoms failed because the DLC didn't sell very well, despite the base game selling well. I think that people shouldn't necessarily read the wrong thing. It wasn't necessarily that the DLC was bad, it was rather that people played the base game. They were excited about it. They played it, and then they got bored of it. And the DLC wasn't necessarily going to change that situation. Just my perspective on that. But the issues did lie in the way they did the base game. Because there are some differences between factions, but not enormous differences. And we need better mechanics in campaigns. One of the problems with Troy is that people said that it just feels like Warhammer with a coat of paint. And they were not necessarily wrong about that. And that's one of the things Creative Assembly should avoid going forward. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And stay tuned for more.